What if I told you that the way you hear your own voice is completely different from how your prospects hear you? You think you sound confident, but they're hearing hesitation. You think you're being thoughtful, but they're perceiving weakness. This isn't about your English skills, it's about vocal authority, and it's the number one thing separating successful closers from those who struggle. In the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal why your voice might be sabotaging your sales conversations and how to fix it immediately. Most closers think their biggest problem is finding the right words, but there's something way more dangerous happening. You can have the perfect script, know every objection handler, and understand your product inside and out, but if your voice doesn't command respect, none of that matters. Let me tell you about Marcus, a closer who learned this the hard way. Marcus had been closing for 3 years. He knew his stuff. He could handle any objection, had his pitch memorized, and genuinely believed in his product. When he got on a call with a prospect who had been qualified by his setter as a perfect fit, someone with budget, authority, and genuine need, he felt confident. This was a $50,000 deal waiting to happen. The call started normally. Marcus introduced himself, asked his opening questions, and began building rapport. But something was wrong. The prospect seemed disinterested. His responses were short. Marcus could feel the energy draining from the conversation. Within 30 seconds, the prospect said he needed to think about it and would call back later. He never did. Marcus was confused. He had said all the right things. His questions were on point. His tonality seemed fine to him, but when he listened to the recording later, he heard something completely different. His voice sounded unsure, almost apologetic. He spoke quietly like he was afraid to take up space in the conversation. There were long pauses filled with and ah. He sounded like he was asking for permission rather than leading the conversation. Here's what Marcus didn't understand. Prospects make credibility decisions within the first 7 seconds of hearing your voice. Not 7 minutes, 7 seconds. Before you even get to your value proposition, before you explain your product, before you handle a single objection, they've already decided whether you're someone worth listening to. This decision happens at a subconscious level based purely on vocal cues. Your voice creates an invisible barrier or bridge before you even start pitching. Think about it this way. When you meet someone in person, you can use body language, facial expressions, and visual cues to build credibility. On a phone call, your voice is doing all that work. It's communicating your confidence, your expertise, and your authority. If your voice doesn't sound like someone who should be trusted with a $50,000 decision, the prospect's brain starts looking for reasons to say no. Research from UCLA shows that vocal authority impacts trust more than visual appearance in sales calls. When people can't see you, they rely even more heavily on vocal cues to determine your credibility. The tone of your voice, the pace of your speech, and the confidence in your delivery become magnified. A study from the Journal of Applied Psychology found that prospects who perceived salespeople as having vocal authority were 73% more likely to move forward in the sales process, regardless of the actual content of their pitch. But here's the scary part. Hesitation in your voice translates directly to hesitation in the prospect's mind about your offer. When you sound uncertain, they become uncertain. When you sound like you're not sure if your product is worth the investment, they start questioning the value. Your vocal uncertainty becomes their buying uncertainty. It's like a mirror. Whatever energy you project through your voice, they reflect back to you. Most closers are completely unaware of their vocal impact. They focus on what they're saying instead of how they're saying it. They practice their scripts but never practice their delivery. They record role plays to check their responses but never analyze their vocal patterns. They think that as long as they know their stuff, their voice will naturally sound confident. This is a huge mistake. Passive vocal patterns trigger the prospect's no response automatically. When you speak with a questioning tone instead of a stating tone, you're literally asking them to disagree with you. When you speak too quietly, you're communicating that you don't believe your message is important enough to be heard clearly. When you fill silence with filler words, you're showing them that you're not comfortable with authority. Think about the last time you heard someone speak with true authority. Maybe it was a doctor explaining a diagnosis, a pilot making an announcement, or a teacher giving instructions. They didn't ask for permission to speak. They didn't apologize for taking up your time. They stated facts with confidence and expected you to listen. That's the energy prospects need to feel from you. Your accent doesn't matter. Your grammar doesn't have to be perfect. Your vocabulary doesn't need to be extensive. But your voice needs to communicate that you're someone who deserves respect and attention. It needs to sound like you believe in what you're saying and you expect them to take action based on your recommendations. Vocal authority is the foundation that makes everything else possible. It's not about sounding like someone else or putting on a fake persona. It's about speaking with the confidence that matches your expertise. When you master vocal authority, your objection handling becomes more effective because prospects believe you when you address their concerns. Your closes become more powerful because your voice communicates certainty. Your entire sales process becomes smoother because you're leading the conversation instead of hoping they'll follow along. The difference between a closer who struggles and one who succeeds often comes down to this one thing. The successful closer sounds like someone who should be trusted with important decisions. Their voice commands attention and respect. They speak with conviction, not just content. But here's what's really wild. The voice you think you have isn't the voice they're hearing. Right now, as you're listening to this, your brain is lying to you about how you actually sound. Every word coming out of your mouth sounds different to you than it does to everyone else. This isn't some weird psychological trick. It's basic science, and it's costing you sales every single day. When you speak, you hear your voice through bone conduction. Sound vibrations travel directly through your skull to your inner ear. This gives you a perception of a fuller, deeper, more resonant sound. But everyone else hears your voice through air conduction, sound waves traveling through the air to their ears. The result is a higher pitched, less resonant sound that can be completely different from what you think you're projecting. This creates a massive disconnect between your self-perception and reality. You think you sound confident and authoritative, but prospects might be hearing something weak and uncertain. You believe your voice commands respect, but they're perceiving hesitation. You feel like you're speaking with conviction, but to them, you sound like you're asking for permission. This illusion makes closers dangerously overconfident in their vocal delivery while being completely unaware of their actual impact on prospects. You practice your pitch in the mirror, and to you, it sounds perfect. You run through objection handlers, and your voice seems strong and persuasive. But the moment you get on a live call, prospects are hearing something entirely different. They're making snap judgments about your credibility based on a voice that doesn't match what you think you're giving them. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people hate to face. When you hear your recorded voice, you're finally hearing what everyone else has been hearing all along. That jarring, unfamiliar sound that makes you cringe, that's your real voice. That's what prospects hear when you're trying to close them on a high-ticket offer. The reason you don't like it is because your brain has been conditioned to expect the version you hear in your head. This disconnect hits international closers particularly hard. If you're already feeling uncertain about your English, the voice illusion amplifies these insecurities. You might think your accent sounds fine to you, but prospects could be struggling to understand you. You believe your grammar mistakes aren't noticeable, but they're being magnified through the air-conducted version of your voice. The confidence you feel internally doesn't translate to the external reality. Most closers avoid listening to their recorded calls because of this discomfort. They focus on what they said instead of how they sounded. They analyze their responses and objection handling but never examine their vocal delivery. This avoidance creates a cycle where they repeat the same vocal mistakes in every sales call without ever realizing it. You might be speaking too quietly, thinking you sound calm and controlled, while prospects hear uncertainty and lack of conviction. You could be rushing through your pitch, believing you sound efficient and knowledgeable while they perceive nervousness and pressure. You might think your pauses make you sound thoughtful, but they're actually hearing awkward silence filled with doubt. The false confidence this creates is dangerous. You walk into sales calls believing your voice projects authority, but you're actually undermining your credibility from the first hello. Every word you speak is creating a different impression than what you intended. Your closing percentage suffers, and you blame it on your script, your leads, or your offer, never realizing that your voice is the real culprit. This is why some closers can say all the right things and still lose deals. They have perfect responses to objections, know their product inside and out, and follow proven frameworks, but their voice doesn't match their expertise. Prospects make decisions based on what they hear, not what the closer thinks they're communicating. The solution starts with desensitization to your real voice. You need to become comfortable with how you actually sound, not how you think you sound. This requires repeatedly listening to recordings of yourself until your brain recalibrates. The initial discomfort is normal. Everyone experiences it. But the closers who push through this discomfort discomfort and face the reality of their vocal delivery are the ones who make real improvements. Recording yourself regularly is the only way to bridge this gap between perception and reality. You can't fix what you can't hear. Every sales call you make without knowing how you really sound is a missed opportunity to improve. The voice coach who can't hear their own delivery problems, the presentation expert who doesn't realize they're putting prospects to sleep with their monotone delivery. Start by recording a 5-minute conversation with yourself. Talk about your product, handle an objection, or practice your opening. Don't script it. Speak naturally like you would on a real call. Then listen to it immediately. Notice the difference between what you thought you sounded like and what you actually sound like. Pay attention to your volume, your pace, your energy, and your confidence level. The first time you do this, you'll probably want to stop listening within 30 seconds. That's normal. Your brain is being confronted with reality and it's uncomfortable. But this discomfort is the first step toward real improvement. You have to get comfortable with your actual voice before you can start improving it. Do this exercise every day for a week. Record yourself having different types of conversations, presenting your offer, handling objections, building rapport, asking questions. Listen to each recording completely, even when it makes you uncomfortable. Over time, your brain will adjust to hearing your real voice, and you'll start noticing patterns and areas for improvement that were invisible before. Once you hear what prospects actually hear, you'll understand why volume is your secret weapon. There's a specific volume level that instantly signals authority. Most closers never find it. They think volume is just about being loud enough to be heard, but it's actually about conveying vitality and confidence. Your volume tells prospects whether you believe in what you're saying before they even process your words. Volume isn't just about decibels, it's about energy. When you speak with proper volume, you're literally moving air, creating vibrations that prospects can feel. This physical impact makes them pay attention. Low volume doesn't just make you hard to hear, it communicates uncertainty, weakness, and lack of conviction. High volume doesn't just make you loud, it can signal desperation, aggression, or insecurity. Speaking too quietly signals uncertainty, while speaking too loudly signals desperation. When you speak below your natural volume, you're essentially apologizing for taking up space in the conversation. You're communicating that your message isn't important enough to be heard clearly. Prospects subconsciously interpret this as you not believing in your own offer. They think if you don't believe it's worth speaking up for, why should they believe it's worth buying? On the flip side, speaking too loudly creates a different problem. It makes you sound pushy, desperate, or like you're trying to force your message on them. Prospects feel attacked rather than engaged. They become defensive and start looking for ways to get off the call. Your volume becomes a wall between you and them instead of a bridge. The sweet spot for authority without aggression is a 6 to 7 out of 10 volume level. This is the level where your voice has enough power to command attention, but not so much that it overwhelms. At this volume, you sound like someone who expects to be heard and respected. You're not asking for permission to speak. You're claiming your space in the conversation. This 6 to 7 level has a physical effect. It can move and vibrate listeners, allowing them to feel your energy. When you speak at this volume, prospects don't just hear your words, they feel your presence. This creates an immediate sense of authority and credibility. They subconsciously think that someone who speaks with this level of confidence must know what they're talking about. But here's where most closers mess up. They stick to one volume level throughout the entire conversation. Consistent volume creates monotony, while strategic volume variation creates engagement. If you stay at a 7 the whole time, your voice becomes background noise. Prospects zone out because there's no variation to hold their attention. The key is learning to modulate your volume strategically. You can draw people in by lowering your volume when emphasizing important points. This forces them to lean in and pay closer attention. Then you can push a point by raising your volume slightly to make it more impactful. This variation keeps prospects engaged and gives you control over the conversation's energy. Think about how a skilled presenter uses volume. They start with moderate volume to establish presence. They lower their voice when sharing something intimate or important, creating a sense of exclusivity. They raise their voice when making a crucial point, ensuring it lands with impact. This isn't manipulation, it's communication mastery. Cultural differences in volume perception create additional challenges for international closers. What sounds assertive in one culture might sound aggressive in another. American business culture generally expects higher volume levels than many Asian or European cultures. If you're used to speaking more quietly in your home country, you might need to adjust your baseline volume upward for American prospects. The good news is that cultural differences in volume are easier to adapt to than accent or grammar issues. You can practice speaking at different volume levels without changing your natural speech patterns. Focus on finding your 6 to 7 level and getting comfortable maintaining it throughout a conversation. Proper volume eliminates the need for filler words and hesitation. When you speak with adequate volume, you're forced to commit to your words. You can't mumble your way through uncertain thoughts. This naturally reduces and like, because you're speaking with intention and conviction. Volume also affects your breathing patterns. When you speak too quietly, you tend to breathe shallowly, which creates tension and nervousness. When you speak with proper volume, you breathe more deeply, which naturally calms your nervous system and makes you sound more confident. Your volume directly impacts the prospect's subconscious perception of your expertise. Someone who speaks with consistent, appropriate volume is perceived as more knowledgeable, trustworthy, and competent. This isn't conscious. Prospects don't think this person speaks loudly, so they must be an expert. Instead, their brain automatically associates vocal confidence with professional competence. This is particularly important for high-ticket sales. When someone is considering a significant investment, they need to believe you're an authority figure. Your volume is one of the first and most consistent signals of that authority. Every word you speak at the wrong volume is undermining your credibility and making the close more difficult. Volume is described as the lifeblood of your voice, giving life to every other vocal foundation. Without proper volume, your tonality falls flat, your pace becomes irrelevant, and your pauses lose their impact. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. Practice finding your 6 to 7 level by recording yourself speaking at different volumes. Start at what feels like a whisper and gradually increase until you feel like you're shouting. Identify where 6 to 7 feels natural and comfortable. This is your authority baseline. Then practice volume variation. Record yourself delivering the same message with different volume patterns. Notice how the meaning and impact change based on when you raise or lower your voice. This skill gives you control over the conversation's energy and direction. Mastering volume variation transforms you from someone who talks at prospects to someone who commands their attention and guides their emotional experience. You become the leader of the conversation instead of just another voice on their phone. But volume without rhythm is like having a sports car with no steering wheel. Elite closers use speech rate like a master musician uses tempo, and it's more powerful than any closing technique you've ever learned. Your pace controls the prospect's emotional state, their attention span, and their decision-making process. Most closers speak at one speed the entire call, killing their chances before they even get to the close. Speech rate variation creates emphasis and maintains attention throughout long sales conversations. When you slow down for important points, you're essentially putting a spotlight on that information. The prospect's brain recognizes the pace change and pays closer attention. When you speed up for transitions or less critical content, you create variety that prevents monotony. This isn't about being fast or slow. It's about being intentional with your pacing. Think about how your favorite podcast host or speaker keeps you engaged. They don't talk at the same speed for 30 minutes straight. They slow down when they want you to really absorb something important. They speed up when they're moving between topics. They use pace changes to create a rhythm that keeps you hooked. Your sales conversations need the same intentional rhythm. Monotone pacing puts prospects into a mental checkout mode within minutes. When you maintain the same speed throughout your entire presentation, their brain stops processing your words as individual pieces of information. Instead, your voice becomes background noise. They start thinking about their emails, their next meeting, or what they're having for lunch. You lose them mentally long before they tell you they need to think about it. This mental checkout happens faster than you think. Research shows that people's attention spans drop significantly when exposed to monotone delivery. Your prospect might be saying, and I see, but their mind has already wandered. They're not processing your value proposition, your social proof, or your closing arguments. You're basically talking to yourself while they wait for an opportunity to end the call. The strategy is simple but powerful. Slow down for important points and speed up for transitions. When you're explaining your core value proposition, slow your pace down. Let each word land with impact. When you're sharing social proof or case studies, reduce your speed so they can visualize the results. When you're handling objections, slow down to show confidence and authority in your response. For transitions between topics, speed up slightly. This signals to the prospect that you're moving to something new and helps maintain forward momentum. When you're asking questions, vary your pace based on the importance of the question. Big qualifying questions deserve slower delivery. Simple clarifying questions can be delivered faster. International closers can use intentional pacing to mask any accent concerns. When you're worried about pronunciation or grammar, the natural tendency is to speed up and rush through words. This makes accent issues more noticeable and harder to understand. Instead, slow down deliberately. Give each word space to breathe. This makes your accent less noticeable and gives prospects time to process process your words. Slower pacing also gives you more time to think in English rather than translating from your native language. When you rush, you're more likely to make grammar mistakes or use awkward phrasing. When you slow down, you can choose your words more carefully and speak more naturally. Your accent becomes less of an issue when prospects can easily understand every word you're saying. The psychological impact of strategic pauses on prospect decision-making is massive. When you pause after asking a closing question, you force them to process and respond. Most closers are terrified of silence and immediately start talking again, which lets the prospect off the hook. The pause creates pressure that encourages them to fill the silence with their thoughts and concerns. Pauses also give prospects time to internalize your message. When you share a powerful benefit or case study, a strategic pause lets them imagine how it applies to their situation. Without the pause, you're moving too quickly for them to connect emotionally with your offer. The pause is where the magic happens, where they start seeing themselves as your customer. Varying speech rate prevents the prospect's mind from wandering during presentations. When you change your pace regularly, their brain stays engaged because it has to keep adjusting to your rhythm. This constant micro-adjustment keeps them present and focused on your words. They can't zone out because your pace keeps changing in ways that demand their attention. Think of it like driving on a winding road versus a straight highway. On the straight highway, you can zone out and drive on autopilot. On the winding road, you have to stay alert and engaged. Your speech rate variations create the winding road experience that keeps prospects mentally present throughout your entire presentation. This technique works especially well during longer presentations or demos. Instead of losing them after 10 minutes, you can maintain their attention for 30, 40, or even 60 minutes by strategically varying your pace. Each pace change resets their attention and pulls them back into the conversation. Rhythm creates emotional connection beyond logical arguments. When you master speech rate variation, you're not just sharing information, you're creating an experience. The prospect feels like they're having a dynamic conversation with someone who understands the importance of what they're saying. This emotional connection is what separates good closers from great ones. The rhythm of your speech influences their emotional state. Faster pacing creates excitement and urgency. Slower pacing creates intimacy and importance. By controlling your rhythm, you're controlling their emotional journey throughout the sales process. You can build excitement about the opportunity, create urgency around timing, and establish intimacy during problem identification. Speech rate mastery allows you to guide prospect emotions and maintain engagement throughout the entire sales process. You become the conductor of the conversation, controlling the tempo and emotional flow. This level of control is what separates elite closers from everyone else. Now, here's where most closers completely sabotage themselves with one simple habit. The most powerful word in sales isn't a word at all. It's the space between words. While closers obsess over perfect scripts and flawless objection handlers, they completely ignore the silence that actually sells. Strategic pauses eliminate filler words and create moments of authority that make prospects lean in and listen. The space between your words is where credibility lives. Most closers fear silence and fill it with and like, instantly destroying credibility. They think these sounds buy them time to think, but they're actually broadcasting uncertainty to prospects. Every filler word tells the prospect that you're not sure what you're saying. You sound unprepared, nervous, and lacking confidence. These tiny sounds create massive damage to your authority. The fear of silence runs deep. Most people can't handle even 3 seconds of quiet without panicking and filling it with noise. They worry the prospect will think they don't know what they're talking about. They fear the conversation will become awkward or that they'll lose momentum. This fear drives them to pollute their speech with meaningless sounds that make them sound amateur. But here's what actually happens during a pause. Prospects get time to process information and internalize your message. When you share a benefit and then pause, they're not sitting there judging your silence. They're thinking about how that benefit applies to their situation. They're visualizing themselves using your product or service. They're connecting emotionally with your offer. The pause creates the mental space where buying decisions happen. Think about how you process information in normal conversation. When someone tells you something important, you need a moment to absorb it. If they immediately start talking about something else, you never get that processing time. The same thing happens in sales. When you rush from point to point without pausing, prospects never get the chance to internalize your message. They hear your words, but they don't feel their impact. Silence after a question forces the prospect to respond rather than letting you continue talking. This is where most closers completely sabotage themselves. They ask a closing question and then immediately start talking again. They get nervous about the silence and fill it with additional information, giving the prospect an easy way out. The pause after a question creates pressure that encourages a response. When you ask, "Does this make sense for your business?" and then stay silent, the prospect has to engage. They can't just listen passively anymore. They have to process the question and give you an answer. This engagement is what moves the sale forward. Without the pause, you're just delivering a monologue while they wait for you to finish. Pauses create dramatic emphasis and make your key points more memorable. When you slow down and pause before sharing an important benefit, you're telling the prospect's brain to pay attention. The pause acts like a spotlight, highlighting the information that follows. Without the pause, your key points get lost in the flow of continuous speech. This emphasis technique works because our brains are wired to notice changes in pattern. When you've been speaking at a consistent pace and then suddenly pause, the change grabs attention. The silence creates anticipation about what's coming next. This anticipation makes the following information more impactful and memorable. International closers can use pauses to think in English rather than translating from their native language. Instead of rushing through words and making grammar mistakes, the pause gives you time to formulate your thoughts properly. This eliminates the pressure to speak quickly and allows you to choose your words more carefully. Your English becomes clearer and more natural. The pause also masks any accent concerns. When you speak too quickly, accent differences become more noticeable. When you use strategic pauses, you give prospects time to adjust to your speaking pattern. They can process your words more easily, making your accent less of a barrier. The pause becomes a tool for clearer communication. Comfortable silence demonstrates confidence and control. When you can pause without filling the space with nervous sounds, you're showing the prospect that you're in charge of the conversation. You're not desperately trying to keep their attention with constant chatter. You're confident enough in your message to let it breathe. This confidence is magnetic and builds trust. The ability to be comfortable with silence sets professionals apart from amateurs. Skilled doctors pause before explaining a diagnosis. Experienced lawyers pause before making important points. Elite performers pause for dramatic effect. The pause signals expertise and authority. It shows you're thoughtful about what you're saying rather than just filling time with words. Mastering strategic pauses requires practice and intentionality. Start by identifying where filler words typically appear in your speech. Usually, they show up when you're transitioning between thoughts or when you're uncertain about what to say next. Instead of filling these moments with or deliberately pause. The silence will feel uncomfortable at first, but it sounds authoritative to prospects. Practice the 3-second rule. After asking any question, count to 3 before saying anything else. This gives the prospect time to process and respond. Most closers can't handle 3 seconds of silence, but this small pause can dramatically increase your closing percentage. The discomfort you feel during the pause is nothing compared to the authority you gain. Record yourself having practiced conversations and count your filler words. Then practice the same conversation with strategic pauses instead of fillers. You'll notice how much more professional and confident you sound. The pauses transform your delivery from nervous rambling to authoritative communication. Strategic pauses transform you from someone who talks at prospects to someone who commands their attention and respect. You become the conductor of the conversation, controlling the pace and emphasis. Prospects feel like they're having a thoughtful discussion with an expert rather than being pitched by someone who's nervous and uncertain. But there's one final element that ties everything together, and it's hiding in plain sight. Your facial expression controls your voice more than your vocal cords do, and prospects can hear your face through the phone. This sounds impossible, but it's scientific fact. When you smile, your cheeks lift and change the shape of your vocal cavity. When you frown, your face tightens and restricts airflow. When you look confused, your voice carries that uncertainty. Prospects don't see your face, but they absolutely hear it in every word you say. Tonality is the emotion underneath your words that determines how prospects feel about your message. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. You can recite the perfect value proposition with flawless grammar, but if your tonality doesn't match your message, prospects will feel the disconnect. They might not consciously notice it, but their gut tells them something is off. This feeling kills trust before you even get to the close. You can say the right words with perfect grammar, but still lose the sale if your tonality doesn't match. Think about the last time someone said, "I'm fine," but you knew they weren't. Their words said one thing, but their tone said another. You trusted the tone, not the words. Your prospects do the same thing. When your tonality doesn't align with your message, they sense incongruence and become skeptical. This mismatch mismatch happens more often than you think. You might be excited about your product, but your voice sounds bored. You could be confident in your solution, but your tone carries doubt. You may want to help them, but your delivery sounds pushy. These contradictions create internal conflict in the prospect's mind. They don't know which signal to trust, so they default to skepticism. Facial expressions directly influence vocal tonality even during phone calls. Your face acts as the remote control for injecting emotion into your voice. When you get nervous, your face often goes blank, which removes emotion from your voice and can make your message less impactful. To effectively communicate and connect with prospects, you must move your face to match the emotion you want to convey. Here's how this works physically. When you raise your eyebrows, your voice naturally becomes more animated and engaging. When you squint slightly, your voice carries more intensity and focus. When you open your mouth wider, your voice becomes more open and friendly. These aren't acting techniques, they're natural physiological responses that happen automatically. Most closers conduct sales calls with dead faces. They stare at their computer screen or look around their room while talking. Their facial muscles remain static, which creates monotone delivery. They sound like robots reading scripts instead of humans having conversations. This robotic tone tells prospects they're being sold to, not helped. The concept that prospects buy based on how you make them feel, not just what you say, is fundamental to sales success. Logic tells them what they need. Emotion tells them what they want. Your tonality is what triggers the emotional response. When your tone matches your message, prospects feel confident about your expertise. When it doesn't, they feel uncertain about your credibility. Consider how you feel when someone speaks to you with warmth and enthusiasm versus someone who sounds flat and disinterested. The warm person makes you feel valued and important. The flat person makes you feel like a transaction. Your prospects experience these same emotional reactions based on your tonality. They decide whether to trust you based on how you make them feel, not just what you tell them. International closers can use tonality to overcome any accent or grammar concerns. When your tone is warm, confident, and engaging, prospects focus on the emotion behind your words instead of your pronunciation. They connect with your energy and enthusiasm rather than analyzing your grammar. Your tonality becomes a bridge that crosses language barriers. This is incredibly powerful for non-native speakers. Instead of worrying about perfect English, focus on conveying the right emotions. A closing question delivered with confident tonality is more effective than perfect grammar delivered with uncertain tonality. Prospects respond to how you make them feel, not how perfectly you speak. Your accent can actually become an asset when paired with proper tonality. Many prospects find international accents interesting and engaging, but only when the tonality matches the message. A thick accent with confident tonality sounds exotic and knowledgeable. The same accent with uncertain tonality sounds confusing and unprofessional. Matching your tonality to your message creates congruence and trust. When you're sharing exciting benefits, your voice should carry excitement. When you're discussing serious problems, your tone should reflect that gravity. When you're asking for the sale, your voice should convey confidence and expectation. This alignment makes prospects feel like you genuinely believe in what you're saying. Congruence is what separates authentic communication from manipulation. When your tonality matches your message, prospects sense authenticity. They feel like you're being genuine with them. When there's a mismatch, they sense manipulation and become defensive. Your job is to align your internal emotion with your external expression. Tonality is what separates robotic presentations from compelling conversations. Anyone can memorize a script and recite features and benefits, but only skilled communicators can deliver that information with the right emotional undertone. Your tonality transforms information into inspiration. It turns features into feelings. It converts logic into desire. Think about the difference between listening to a recorded message and having a live conversation. The recorded message might contain the same information, but it lacks the human connection that comes from authentic tonality. Your prospects crave that human connection. They want to feel like they're talking to someone who cares about their success, not just someone reading from a script. Mastering tonality through intentional facial expressions gives you the ability to influence prospect emotions and create genuine connection regardless of your English proficiency level. Practice speaking with different facial expressions and notice how your voice changes. Smile while talking about benefits. Lean forward and squint when discussing problems. Open your eyes wide when sharing exciting results. Your face controls your voice and your voice controls their emotions. Now you understand why vocal authority is the foundation of everything else. Vocal authority isn't about perfect English. It's about commanding presence that makes prospects want to listen and follow your lead. Your accent doesn't matter. Your grammar doesn't need to be flawless. What matters is speaking with the confidence that matches your expertise. Here's your challenge. Record yourself having a 5-minute conversation and analyze what you actually sound sound like versus what you think you sound like. Listen for your volume, pace, pauses, and tonality. Notice the gap between your perception and reality. Every successful closer had to face this gap between their perceived voice and their actual voice. That's where real growth begins.